Well, it seems that little Johnny came into the kitchen where his mother was making dinner. And his birthday was coming up, and he thought this was a great time to tell his mother what he wanted. "Mom, I want a bike for my birthday." Little Johnny was said to be a little bit of a troublemaker. He had gotten into trouble at school and at home. And given this behavior, Johnny's mother asked him if he thought he deserved to get a bike for his birthday. Johnny, of course, thought he did. And Johnny's Christian mother wanted Johnny to reflect on his behavior over the last year. "Go to your room, Johnny, and think about how you have behaved this year. Then write a letter to God and tell him why you deserve a bike for your birthday." So little Johnny stomped up the stairs to his room and sat down to write God a letter. Letter number 1. "Dear God, I have been a very good boy this year, and I would like a bike for my birthday. I want a red one. Your friend, Johnny." Well, Johnny knew this wasn't true. He had not been a very good boy this year, so he tore up the letter and started over. Letter 2. "Dear God, this is your friend Johnny. I have been a good boy this year and would like a red bike for my birthday. Thank you, your friend Johnny." Johnny knew this wasn't exactly true either, so he tore up the letter and started again. Letter number 3. "Dear God, I've been an okay boy this year. I still would really like a bike for my birthday. Johnny." Johnny knew he could not send this letter to God either. So Johnny wrote a 4th letter. "God, I know I haven't been a good boy this year. I'm very sorry. I will be a good boy if you just send me a bike for my birthday. Please? Thank you, Johnny." Johnny knew, even if it was true, this letter was not going to get him what he wanted. And by now, Johnny was getting very upset. So he went downstairs and told his mom that he wanted to go to church. Johnny's mother thought her plan had worked. So Johnny looked very sad. "Just be home in time for dinner," Johnny's mother told him. Johnny walked down the street to the church on the corner, and little Johnny went into the church and up to the altar. He looked around to see if anyone was there. Johnny bent down and picked up a statue of the Virgin Mary. He slipped it under his shirt and ran out of the church, down the street, into the house, and up to his room. He shut the door to his room and sat down with a piece of paper and a pen. Johnny began to write his letter to God. Letter number 5. "God, I've got your mama. If you want to see her again, send the bike. Signed, you know who." We learn to manipulate at an early age, don't we? Oh, we can. All right. So we are continuing this Sunday with our exploration into daring greatly. And so last week we talked about minding the gap, that practice that calls us to be aware, to stay aware, to remember where we might be living incongruent with our aspired values. What are we practicing? What are the values that we're practicing? And as we pay attention to that, if there is a gap, that's called minding the gap. And we set the intention last week to deepen our practice of self-awareness so that we can make more conscious choices. We were to reflect on these questions. What are my aspired values? And in my life, Where am I out of alignment in living those values? And then to notice what being out of alignment brought up in us. And to be very gentle with ourselves. As it's not about being perfect, but just being honest and authentic and compassionate and aware. So how'd you do? How'd you do? Okay, great. So this week, the chapter that Brene Brown is talking about is called Disruptive Engagement. And what she is wanting to do in this chapter is to invite her readers to disrupt the status quo of what she feels is taking the human element out of our educational system and our work environments. She talks about how it seems in those environments that we've snuffed out creativity and innovation and learning. And instead, we have focused more on not being enough and the practice of shame and blame. And so she calls us up to rehumanize, to recognize, to become more aware of the ways we have disconnected in relationship. Because as we look at our educational system, as we look at any system in our life, our political system, anything, it's all relationship. It's humans relating with each other. And she calls us up to be leaders, to be that disruption, to disrupt the patterns of fear, expressing its scarcity and blame and shame, and courageously take a stand to be compassion and connection, and to create safe, loving, healthy, empowered relationships. And she reminds us that we're all leaders. Leaders are people who can see a greater possibility, who see people's infinite potential, and they call it forth. And I know that's what we do in our lives. I know that. So she calls us to live in a more wholehearted way, to engage in a more wholehearted way. And remember that wholeheartedness in this conversation called Daring Greatly has as its foundation worthiness. Its focus is being vulnerable, to express vulnerability through our willingness to be courageous and compassionate and connected. She's calling us up to rehumanize, to reconnect with each other, to wholeheartedly engage. So, the thing is, what keeps us from expressing the courage that we are, the compassion that we are, the connection that we really are? What keeps us from truly, wholeheartedly engaging in our work and in our relationships? Well, she says what it's going to take from us to do this is to be willing to take a look at our fears. Where are we afraid? Where are we afraid in our relationships? You know, I think what it is, and I'll just speak for myself, sometimes it can feel very vulnerable to really be seen. I don't know about you, but I've got some warts and some foibles and some growing edges. Yeah. And sometimes that feels very vulnerable for someone to see. Because the thing is, I think what we're afraid of is that we'll be shamed, we'll be left, we won't be loved. But she is calling us in this conversation to connect at a deeper level and to claim our courage and our compassion and our connection. to move past this seeming high standard of perfection that we have in our culture. We seem to have this very, very high bar, don't we, of perfection that we're supposed to meet. If you look on any magazine cover, goodness gracious, from Cosmopolitan to AARP, it just looks like everyone's perfect, everybody's got it going on, nobody has any warts or foibles on those covers. This is an opportunity for us, once again, to be gentle with ourselves. You know, I read an online article about a corporation. It's a leading high-tech corporation, and this article was published by the Harvard Business Review. Because what happens in corporations and also in our relationships is that we become afraid. We become afraid to speak up, right? We become afraid to speak our truth. And so apparently there were 200 employees from this corporation that were interviewed to ask why they did not speak up to their bosses. And the first thing was self-censorship. It was common on all levels. And even though the company had procedures and mechanisms in place for encouraging people to speak up, they still, half the respondents said they were still afraid not to speak up. They did not want to speak up, to challenge traditional ways of doing things. What they were most reticent to talk about were not problems, but rather creative ideas for improving things, for innovation and change that would definitely support the growth of the company. It was all about self-preservation, because what they saw was when someone stepped outside the box and said something, all of a sudden, their desk was cleared, their office was empty. Yeah. So the result is disconnection, scarcity, blame, manipulation and control, no room for courage, compassion, and connection, no room for wholehearted engagement, because that takes vulnerability, doesn't it? See, Brené Brown talks about vulnerability and how we can't have a vision without vulnerability. You know, a vision is something bigger than we are, right? Vision calls us to be more than we've ever been before, to do what we've never done before, to get outside the box. It takes vulnerability because it's risking. So if we in our work environments, if we in our relationships are afraid, there can be no vision to be greater. She said, without vulnerability, there cannot be opportunity and possibility. So she suggests that the shift here would have to be from controlling to engaging, with vulnerability to taking risk and cultivating trust. And how do we do that? She said we've got to be willing to take off that armor of fear. Oh, folks, all those ways that we've protected ourselves. That self-protection that we took on possibly when we were a wee one out of survival. To be willing to really take off that armor of fear and to know the truth of what we are as love, as whole, divine beings. See, because remember, this is a unity teaching. Yes, in the meditation that we did this morning, we affirmed that we're divine love. That is a part of the divine wholeness that we are. Unity teaches the 12 powers. If you're familiar with the 12 powers, they are those aspects of our divine nature, and how I describe them as we are this beautiful diamond. And those 12 powers are facets of that diamond. And you are love. You are absolutely love. And you are also power. Because in this conversation of what is ours to do to wholeheartedly engage, we can claim our power of power, which is our ability to take dominion. Our ability to take dominion over our limited thinking. We can do it. We can say yes to a new possibility. So, Another way to create wholehearted engagement is to trust we're enough to have difficult conversations. Those difficult conversations. Now, you think if little Johnny's mom could have sat down and had a conversation with him, maybe he would have realized he didn't have to manipulate and control to get what he wanted, right? So what's between us and our willingness to have a hard, difficult conversation? And we label them hard and difficult because we know what was going to call us up to do is to be really honest and vulnerable about whatever's on our heart, right? And so I know for myself that when it's time to have what I consider to be a difficult, hard conversation, that the first thing I need to do is to check in with my intention. What's my intention to have this conversation? Is it to be right, or is it to generate love? Is it to be right, or is it to generate love? So that takes self-awareness, doesn't it? That keeps coming up. I must be self-aware about my intention. And then, listening. I need to be able to listen. And I'm sure you've probably heard this, that listening is being willing to be changed by what you hear. And you know when we get anxious about something, when we're afraid, and we're in a conversation with someone, and we're like 10 steps ahead, and we're preparing what we're going to say? Yeah, that's not really listening, is it? Listening is being in the present moment, being present and available, being willing to be changed by what we're hearing. And so, when we set the intention for love, we are being love and we are committed to generating love in whatever it is that we're saying. So, and be willing. Being willing to admit we've made a mistake. I made a mistake. I apologize. Being honest and humble and vulnerable from your open heart. That is wholehearted engagement because that takes courage, it takes self-compassion, and it takes connection. Being willing to have those difficult conversations. And remember, you don't have to do it perfectly. If you approach it by the commitment, the intention to be love and create love, it'll go well. It will go well. So that's the journey we're on, to live wholeheartedly, to dare greatly, to call forth our courage and our compassion and our connection through our willingness to be vulnerable, through our willingness to be aware of and release our fears as best we can. And remember, folks, this is a journey, and we're all on it. And how beautiful that we're on this journey together in spiritual community. Because if you look around this room, there are people in this room that will walk with you on this journey and support you in daring greatly. There are people in this room that will support you in being the love that you are, to wholeheartedly engage. So this week, let's take a look, an honest look in meditation and prayer at what our fears are. What are your fears? It's okay. We all have them. And once again, and I say this in every class I teach, please be gentle with yourself. We all have fears. And so what would be yours to do to let go of that armor of fear and to allow yourself to be vulnerable, to courageously allow yourself to be the compassion and the connection that you are? Because that's the call. And to be willing to have those difficult conversations, to set the intention with every word that we speak, and especially when we're sitting across from someone, set the intention to be love and to generate love. That is wholehearted engagement. Do we say yes? Yes. All right, let's affirm together. I am wholeheartedly engaged in life and feel courageous, compassionate, and connected. And so it is.